Welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards. Our guest today is Neil Taylor, who joins us from Europe. Neil's father, Patrick, died in March 2021. 6 days later, Neil's son was born and given Patrick as his middle name. In that moment of grief and new life, Neil realized he had become responsible for helping his son know a grandfather he would never meet. That realization led him to create Me and My Old Man, a 12-week guided storytelling experience that helps families record and preserve the voices and life stories of parents and loved ones. In this conversation, Neil and Mel talk about grief, fatherhood, family memory, the difference between remembering someone and truly understanding them, and why the questions we avoid may be the ones that matter most. This is Stories from Real Life, and today's story is Neil Taylor's Me and My Old Man and My Son.
Hello again, and welcome to this week's episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thank you for joining us for the podcast where real stories are so much more interesting than fiction. Today on Stories from Real Life, Neil Taylor is my guest, and we'll talk about grief, fatherhood, and the difference between remembering someone and truly understanding them. Neil joins us today from Spain. Neil, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Before we begin, I want you to tell us about your dad, Patrick.
Yeah, sure. So my dad, Patrick, was born in 1938. He was English like me. I live in Spain, but I'm English. He's born in 1938 in Bangkok, Thailand, to two English parents. They moved over there because his dad worked for British American Tobacco. And it was the sort of, the dawn of the First World War. And it was, a time I can't even imagine, but there was lots of moving around with his family. So he was the oldest, but his dad continued to work and they traveled around Asia as the war was happening, trying to avoid any issues. He was sent to boarding school age 8 on his own with his brother for company, his younger brother, who was 6 years old for company, and no parents. Yeah, and so he sort of lived a potted history in those early years. A few months in Australia. I know they moved to avoid the Japanese when they got involved in the war. He lived in India, obviously born in Bangkok, and then went to English boarding school where, he spent from 8 till 18. Yeah, and then continued his life in university in England, and then met my mum at some point, was working in a corporate job, moved to America where he had my older sister, had my middle sister and I in America, and they planned to stay for 3 years. They stayed for 12. And so I left the US when I was 7. And then continued being a proud dad and a hard worker and a avid traveler. And then I guess sort of where this story that we're going to talk about perhaps as it comes to is he had an early retirement because he really wanted to spend time with kids and sort of, I don't know, it felt like he wanted to watch me play sport. So he retired and traveled a lot in his latter years. And then sadly, dementia struck around about 2017, 2018. He separated from my mum at some point at some point in 1990. He'd met someone and had a partner for 10 years and had some great times. But yeah, dementia struck in sort of 2017, 2018, and then sort of in parallel with COVID, which is just such a terrible time to be going through that because of the separation it causes. He then passed away in March 2021.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry to hear that. Sorry about your loss. All right. So your son was born only 6 days after your father died. Did that feel like comfort or grief or continuity to you, or maybe a combination of all of those things?
Yeah, probably a swirling combination of all those things. My dad's passing was coming. It was coming down the road. His situation was getting worse, and at the same time, the arrival of my son was coming closer. And I was conscious of this sort of, would they share a room? Would their time pass? And sadly, I know it would have been physically sharing a room, not mentally, because Dad was quite dislocated from reality by then. But it would have meant a lot to just to have that moment and to see them have a cuddle. But yeah, we missed it by 6 days. So yeah, it was a funny one because my sister actually only said to me recently, his sort of anniversary, his deathversary, as we called it, passed. And my sister said, obviously she was going through her own grief and she had never really thought that, she hadn't really considered what I was going through with the death and the birth at the same time and how that was playing out for me. And I guess you don't really know anyone else's grief journey because whatever's going on in your life is very different. But I guess for me, I was sad by that didn't happen, that they didn't share a room. And then I was just thrust into, my son was born, he was in intensive care for 4 days, and I always refer to it as like a hallucination because you're asleep in those early days. And I've got an older child. She was 3, 4. Fortunately, my mum was around to look after her a bit. So I, go back from the hospital. So those early days, it was just, I don't know. I don't think it's possible to hold that much in one's brain. Well, at least I didn't. So my focus was on my boy and if he was going to be okay. I think you said grief is obviously one of the things, and for me that just played out a long time after. It's just such a fascinating thing, grief. Yeah, so much so that it could have been months. So son was okay, and 6 months later we actually moved. That's when we moved country. We moved from England to Spain, and he was a terrible sleeper. And again, that kind of hallucination continued. So and so that was the juggling of moving, migrating, keeping work stable, raising, 2 young kids. And sometimes, I don't know, maybe it's a male thing, but, I could compartmentalize some of that. And it really I think the grief came out for me much later in 2024 when I just had some more time off. And I've been thinking about this. I've just been was struck by this regret that because they couldn't share a room, it was up to me to pass on any stories that would transmit the essence of what my dad was, which is such a, it's such a bizarre and, not nice place to be in. It's like this person, I'll serve you a few anecdotes, right? To my son, that is, I can serve you a few anecdotes and I can give snippets of things that happen throughout my life, but even those snippets will start to fade a little bit. And what a shame that it was or is that I haven't made time to capture anything from his first person perspective so that my son could feel in touch with what that is, because so much of me, is my dad. And I think of all of us, even though we might want to resist that or push that away, our parents' experiences and their parents' experiences. And I think, you looked into this and into the generations past and how that comes through us. I was just filled with regret that I hadn't done anything to communicate that down to, I hadn't done anything in advance to make that better.
So are you familiar with the song The Living Years by Mike and the Mechanics?
I know the Mike and the Mechanics, but I don't know that song. I'm writing it down. Tell me.
Yeah,
Tell me more.
Your story is so much like a part of that song where he talks about, well, the song is about remembering to tell people that you love them and spend time with them during the living years, because once they're gone, it's too late. But he talks in one part of the song about how he remembers the morning when his father passed away. And then in the next line, he says, I think I called his spirit later that same year. I'm sure I heard his echoes and my baby's newborn tears. So his son was born right after his dad passed away. So that's a song. If you don't know it, I recommend you listen to that song and make sure you got plenty of tissue nearby. You will need.
Yeah. Well, that sounds fun, Melvin. I've not heard that, and I will need a tissue. I needed a tissue this morning with another song, but another story.
Well, we'll talk about all of that. And one thing I want to share with you, you're a lot younger than I am, and my father died a long time ago, like when I was 13 years old. I'm about to turn 60, and I still mourn every day for him. So you talk about grief being a weird thing. It is a really weird thing. You never know when it's gonna hit you. It never really goes away. Obviously, it's not as the emotions aren't nearly as strong as they were when I was a teenager. But I think about my children having children and how my parents didn't get a chance to, especially my dad didn't get a chance to be a grandfather to them. So those kind of things, those memories will sort of strike you in unusual times and catch you off guard. So when did you first realize that it was your job to help your son know a man that he will never meet?
Well, I mean, I guess maybe I'm doing myself a little bit of a disservice because I had tried to capture some of my dad's life when he was alive, before dementia struck. Rewind back to 2013. So 4 or 5 years before the signs of dementia were coming. And I tried to get him to do a written biography. And I was moving abroad at the time, and I think that was part of the reason why I wanted to feel maybe connected or close, or just So I started that with some questions, and I said, make a start, Dad, and then I'll prompt you again and be like, tell me more about this. And I didn't understand that part. So we did that. We did that for back and forth, and we got about 12 pages. And it was, that's great. It did capture some of the things I had heard. These things like he heard Gandhi talk to the masses at a sort of not a rally, but and the way he talked about it is that he was on the top of a hill, and he was, I guess there were speakers there, but he could see Gandhi in the distance as a sort of speck on the horizon, and he was translating for his parents. And so at that point, I was always curious, like, when did you learn how to speak Gujarati? And he was like, yeah, I could speak Gujarati. And I was like, this is like mad. Like, you're in this,
wow,
this English man who, how did that happen? And so there are some lovely parts to what he wrote, and we just didn't get very far, and I didn't make it a priority. And so it's nice that that's there, but what really I wish I'd done was capture his voice, because that's something that's, it just fades so quickly for me. And that would be something that, my son could experience firsthand. And so with that in mind, and that feeling that I'd messed up, I had a break in work and projects that were going on, and it was sort of niggling at me, this idea. And I just thought, I don't know what this is. I love podcasts. I love stories, much like you. And I thought maybe it could be a podcast, and that would be a nice creative project for me. So I actually reached out to just some friends, a handful of friends, and 3 came back and said, yeah, I'm up for doing this. So I just went about interviewing them. I interviewed them, and then I interviewed their dads. It was just the dads at the time. For 4 hours. I interviewed the son for an hour, the dads for 4 hours in separate sessions. And then we came together and had a chat. And I just was trying to understand that interesting. I edited it up. So I edited it up so it had nice music, and it had, nice transitions, and it was something joyful to listen to. And then we regrouped, and I didn't know what it was going to be at that point. As I said, a podcast maybe, or just, if it's just this gift for 3 people, then at least I've sort of, covered up that wound in a way, or made sure that they won't feel like I do, because I know what that feels like. And I don't want that on anyone. And so that was the start of what I now feel like is actually the reason why I'm here, which is a nice thing out of something not very nice.
So is that what became Me and My Old Man?
Yeah, exactly. That was in the late summer of September, autumn time of September 2024. I did the 3 families, and it was at the point that, at that point there was a bit of imposter syndrome. I had a experience in marketing, and I could, was sort of creative in a business sense. I've always played instruments, and, I would consider myself a creative person. So I had that, but I'd never really interviewed someone. I could edit music and edit audio and video. So I just sort of played my hand to that a bit. But I felt a bit of an imposter. Who am I to be in this space to uncover or help stories come out between a father and a son, or a daughter and a mum? And, isn't this something they can do themselves? Maybe, I failed, but maybe this is, it's not my space. It's quite an intimate space to be in. What I quickly realized within the 2 families, pretty much immediately in those wrap-up sessions, was that I was needed, because, well, I have an example in the second family. It was in the wrap-up with the dad, John, and his son, Stephen. And the dad was just a wonderful storyteller. Stephen, the son, was a friend of mine from university, and I didn't know his dad. So that's why I just started with the interview with the son, to say, tell me about Dad, tell me a bit about his life, much like you did at the start of this, so that I can go to him and ask some questions. And what are you interested in? Like, what do you want to know? What do you not know? Or what do you want to capture? Is he, that joke that he always tells, you've heard it 100 times, but maybe you want to capture that. And so with this pair, we got to the end, and John he's a really great storyteller, very vivacious, and just a joy to listen to, and a great sort of northern English voice from Yorkshire. We got to the end, the wrap-up session, and at some point he just sort of interrupted me. I think that's why I remember so much. And he just started telling me a very short story, a very wistful story about a dream that he had about his own dad. And it was fairly inconclusive. He just said that I was there. I had this dream, and he was in. It was like he was in 3D. It was so real, and he was wearing his green tweed jacket that he always used to wear, and he just reached out his hand, and he held my hand, and we started walking together, and he was just so real. But then I woke up, and I've never had that dream again. I was sort of blown away by this. It was that, but not much more. It was just a passing glimmer of something. And I spoke to, after we finished the call, I was, shivers on the end of my skin, and I called my friend up and said, how was it, and whatever. And he said, it was really good. And I said, had you heard that story about that dream before? And he said, no, I've never heard that before. And it was at that point that I realized that I knew that that never would have come up. There never would have been the space for that to come up. Knowing my friend who he is, he's a great mate, lovely bloke. I just know they were very close as a pair, but it's the kind of thing that just doesn't come up. At that moment, I just thought, well, I can't really turn my back on this, because I feel like this is bringing out stories. It's not only capturing things that we've heard 100 times, but there's so much stuff that we don't know about our parents. And so at that point, I just felt like I couldn't turn around. So I finished with a third family. And at that point, I was still sort of applying for projects and jobs and things. But at that point, I just thought, I'm going to give this a go. Because it feels, I'd always I'd moved away from marketing into social impact areas, and I just have always wanted to do something meaningful. And I've, the concept of ikigai, in the Japanese concept of, something that you can bring to the world, something that makes a difference, something that you can get paid for. And there's a couple others, I think. It just felt like this was right in the middle of all of that for me. So I thought I had got to give this a go. And so, very quickly, I had a name bouncing around my head for a bit. And then I just thought, well, something that was colloquial and just something you would say. Me and my old man went for a walk the other day, went for a round of golf, and he fell over, and it made me laugh quite a lot. It's just a phrase that you say. And so I just put a website up in October, I think, November, and then went about trying to, do it for people. So at that point, I thought, after the 3, I decided it's not a podcast, because that would leave me with this, I think a sort of torn approach to the stories. If I was working in that intimate space with a family and thinking about an external audience and whether they would enjoy the stories, then I might be doing a bit of a disservice to what this really was about, which was where it came from for me, which was I didn't have my own dad's stories. So I thought, if I make it a business, I can actually say the value was clear in that second session. This value is clear. This is worth something. And if something's worth something, then, someone should pay some money for it. So, I went on the business side and called up me and my old man, put up a website, meandmyoldman.co.uk in like 3 hours, as you can do these days, or even quicker now. And then went about seeing how people would pay for it, how much, and how the design of the experience worked. And I guess fast forward maybe 18 months now, I've done 32 families, I've got 3 on the go, 350 hours of interviews. Was that 12, 13 days of my life, listening to people. It's just in 6 countries. It's been, it's been an overwhelmingly positive project or experience for everyone that's done it. So I'm just, I'm sort of proud. I think my dad would be proud. And I really want to help people make the space, because I feel like that's son and dad, that, Stephen and John, they're everywhere. And it'll be the siblings as well. And I haven't even gone to the point where I started doing it with siblings and mums and dads, and even divorced couples. And there's lots of combinations I've done. And there's so many levels of benefit and value in just stopping and taking time to think, reflect, share, and talk just about someone that you love. And then to hear them talking about their life, it's a really special thing. And I just hope I can do it more and more.
Okay. So you use the phrase, making sure no family loses their loved one as well as their story. What does that phrase mean to you?
Yeah, well, I think everyone's got a story. Some people feel a bit resistant because they think, I haven't done anything that special. And I'm always back that down, because everyone's special. Everyone's got a great story. I always talk about the ordinary extraordinary. I got that right? Yeah, no, the extraordinary ordinary. So, the ordinary thing we think about ourselves is extraordinary, and it is to our kids at least, So I think it's really important for everyone as we go through life. We have our internal narratives, we have our script. The opportunity to share that, or to get that out of our brain, to share that with our loved ones, is only going to create more empathy and understanding of who we really are, or the fullness of who we are as a person. And I guess very much in that child parent dynamic, sometimes we never get out of that mold of that dynamic. Yeah, strangely, it evolves in this way where I feel like the parent is always someone you look up to, and then at a certain point you start to look after them as they start to age, and you need to care for them. So there is a role of us that happens then. But yeah, I just think it's not. It's just I just think it's so important that we take the time. Like, obviously we may spend hopefully face-to-face time with the people we love, and if we're geographically close, we can meet them for Sunday barbecues or Christmas and Easter. Or if we're far apart, maybe less so. But even in those moments, they are very ritualistic, and those rituals are very comforting, that you wouldn't give them up for the world. But I feel like there's an opportunity to, sometimes we find it difficult to actually get to the deeper stuff. That might be a sweeping statement. People may feel that's not me, that doesn't work for me, and that's great if you have that. But what I see is that these families that I'm working with have a desire to know more, to learn more. They just don't have the mechanisms or the space or the know-how to ask those questions and be a good listener. Listening is a skill. It's a big skill, I think.
Absolutely. And that's what I enjoy about this podcast, getting to hear people's stories. I just ask them a few questions and let them tell their stories. And I just sit back and listen. You talk about generally older parents, fathers in particular, and their adult children. Tell me about your relationship with your young children and how you hope that relationship develops as they grow older.
Yeah, good question. I think, but by doing this in the everyday, one positive aspect for me is that it makes me reflect on my parenting. I also get to see a lot of other modalities of parenting and parental relationships. So there's often, I'll get off a session where, yeah, someone's talking, and I think, gosh, that's how I want to live my life, a bit more like that, or I want to be less like that. I think one of the nice thing actually is that by having this project, having sometimes pictures of my dad, around the place or on the computer, and the kids come up and they see him, he's a part of the conversation. They know that this is my job. Like, grandpa is involved in my work, and I think they have a good understanding of that, or getting it, which is nice because, when you surface that person, they stay real, they stay part of things. And it's, so that's a nice thing. So yeah, in terms of my parenting, I think there's definitely things I hear and I think I want to stay away from that. So one example would be, as a dad, is, it's a different time, but the baby boomer generation, it was more traditional roles between men and women. So, it's a career dad, which is, pretty much my dad. He traveled quite a lot. He didn't really cook meals. He would cook the barbecue, of course. Meat on the grill would come. That would be the dad's job. Yeah, and so traditional roles. But then, my dad had a change of gear. As I said, he retired early, so I was about 14 when he retired, and he whatever age that was, I think he pre-60. And for me, that was a sign that he wanted to enjoy other things in life. He wanted to enjoy traveling and good food and seeing places and seeing people and seeing old friends and seeing his kids play sport and supporting them what they were doing. So I guess, yeah, consciously now, that is something that I want to replicate. I've heard lots of dads who've done the opposite and just been very work focused. So much so that even when I ask questions about their life, even if it's a sort of personal question, or a question around their feelings about something, or their decisions or their choices, it sort of very quickly flips into this career answer, or about at this time at work when they did this and their boss said that. And it's so interesting when that happens, because with certain people, it kind of happens repeatedly, and you realize that their frame of reference is really their job. And for me, I sort of think, gosh, how narrow is that in a view of what's possible for a human to do? But that obviously of the time is what was expected of a man, let's say. In the Western world, a man was expected to go 9 to 5, bring the bread in, and have dinner on the table when he got home. So So yeah, there's lots of those things that come up, and there was another one actually, the second family that I mentioned at the beginning. He said something very interesting. There was a time when he was a teacher, and he had the opportunity to go up and be not the principal of the school, but even sort of into sort of the education authorities and look after several schools, and there was an opportunity for that to happen. And I think it included a move away from where they were. And at that point in time, his kids were getting on really well. I think one of them was about to change schools, and so he decided not to take that track. And what it meant is that he sort of stayed static at his level of teaching as a head of economics, I think, in a sixth form school, so with 17, 18-year-olds. And that was his career, let's say. And the way he spoke about that I just thought was so revealing and so helpful for his son to know, and just quite inspiring for me that he made that choice, because everything around him must have been pushing him towards like, well, that's what, the status and the idea of where you could go to is this, but you've consciously made a choice to be more of a family man and to, be around for Saturdays and Sundays always, and, when they're home. And so I think, I was looking at the son, listening to this, thinking, is this what you think as well? Because I was really taking that on board. So, I think for me, it's quite a good day job to have, to keep you on your toes about parenting. And I don't get it right. Don't get me wrong. I founded this business. It's my baby. I have some editors working with me and people supporting, but really the success, falls upon me. And with that comes the strain and stress and my internal, A-type personality to make this work, to make this happen. For example, it's 8 p.m. for me right now, bedtime for the kids. Just that had to be dropped tonight. But normally that's do not let that happen. But yeah, I don't get it right all the time. But at least it's nice to have a reminder of when I can sort of see through the window of others' families how to do it. I can evaluate and course correct.
Well, sorry to keep you away from your children's bedtime tonight. It's like middle of the day here. It's 1:33 p.m. where I am in central the United States, in Texas. So sorry about that. Tell them I said hi. Tell them I said hi. You talk about your dad being from Generation X and having more traditional roles and never cooking at home except for what you call barbecue. So I'm in Texas, where barbecue is a way of life. What is barbecue to an Englishman who lives in Spain?
Oh, good question. Oh, I mean, a barbecue for my dad would have been, he called them bratwurst in Wisconsin, where I was. So we'd have burgers. Yeah, none of that slow roast stuff. Probably, yeah, not as professional as you're doing there. My definition of barbecue, I think, probably comes from that year away that I had in 2013, was in Argentina. And actually, I had a bit of time in Chile, a few years earlier than that. But yeah, in Argentina, where beef is religion, I probably like Texas. It would be, well, they have different cuts there. So there was a cut called matambrito, which is pork. It's a bit like belly of pork, but it's like a long thing where they put lemons on it. So you squeeze lemon on, you leave lemons on top of the pork, and it gets super juicy, and all the fat, over time gets obviously very deliciously tasty. And matambrito means, mata hambre means kill hunger. So it's like the little hunger killer. Which is a great word. And they have chorizo, yes, which is like a sort of fat sausage, and then they have various different cuts, like entrañas, like a skirt steak, and you have bife de chorizo, which is like a thicker sirloin steak, bife de lomo, which is fillet. And when they do it in Argentina, sometimes you can get the whole mix on the plate and the grill. So yeah, I'm proud of one barbecue I did, which I had the matambrito. I had all of the different cuts. There were no Argentinians there to judge me, so I got a round of applause. But I'm
gave
sure
yourself an A plus.
Yeah,
yeah. Here in Texas, like you mentioned, beef is the king, and brisket is. When you say brisket, that automatically means barbecue in Texas. You can also barbecue ribs or chicken or sausage or some other things, but it starts with brisket. And I don't know if you've ever had brisket or ever tried to cook brisket, but it is a very long process. It's a minimum of 12 hours, and it can take as much as 18 hours sometimes, depending on how thick the meat is.
Wow. That's amazing. So that starts the day before, or up early in the morning?
Yeah, you would probably, for dinner, like as you said, it's about 8:30 your time. you would probably start at around 6 p.m. and you would stay up all night, or you start around the time you are right now. You'd stay up all night cooking and get it ready for dinner the next day.
Wow. And what are you putting on that to marinate it? What's your favorite marinade?
It's just salt. It's only salt and pepper here in Texas. It's the cut of the beef is what is the most important thing. It's not dressing it up. It's not the fancy kind of seasonings. It's just strictly salt and pepper.
Wow. You let the meat do the talking.
Yes. The meat and the skill of the person handling the meat. That's though if you can't do those two simple things right, you're probably going to get laughed right out of Texas, and your family will be embarrassed by you. And then they'll come to you and they'll have some new stories to tell for the future generations.
I love that. Wow. I need to have that. I need to experience that. Sounds great.
Well, if you're ever in Texas, let me know. I'll have you over here.
Very kind.
So what are some patterns that you hear over and over again when people finally begin telling the truth about their lives?
Well, one pattern is that people actually don't spend that much time. They don't stop. I remember the fifth family. I said, how do you look back on the choices you made? We've talked now for 5 hours. How do you look back on the choices you made? What drove those choices? And he said, and I said, when was the last time you thought about that? And he said, the last time I thought about that was when you asked me that question. And that's also the first time I've ever thought about it. And there is this modality, I think, of moving forwards is, I don't know if it's part of that. Yeah, I don't know if it's part of this baby boomer generation to, in England, they say, keep calm and carry on. It's quite sort of a moniker. And if you were to go, maybe when you were in London recently, you saw that in the tourist shops, but it is quite of a cultural, it's in the cultural psyche. Keep calm, carry on. Post-war, you just got to make ends meet, keep going forwards. And so the skill
and
or
mind the gap.
of,
That's the other thing.
Yeah. So you did see it, yeah. Mind the gap for the underground, the metro. Yeah, and so I think it's one's the sort of making the space to reflect. One's giving themselves the license to reflect and feeling like it's not indulgent. And so that's something that's the stiff upper lip, which they say a lot. And again, not all my families are in England, Canada, US, Australia. But that is, I think that's a point of resistance for that generation because they're not used to sharing so much. They're not used to someone asking questions sometimes. Some people don't even need me to be there asking questions. They really just need me to hold the microphone and create the space. I had one recently. He was a Cypriot man, and it was just unbelievable. We did 8 hours, and I, much like your approach, but in this case, I didn't really need to ask him much. It just all came out. It was all very linked and linear. It all made sense. He had a recollection of the names and people and all the stages and the years almost. It was incredible the way he told his stories and remembered his life. But he was a bit of a misnomer. I think most people struggle with, sometimes aren't used to reflecting, which is, it's a really interesting thing. I wonder if the millennials or my generation will be the same, or we've had that maybe things in our life which have made us be more reflective, whether that be sharing our image on the internet via social media, or I guess people are more used to sharing their feelings, their emotions much more overtly than someone who was born in the 1940s or 30s.
Okay, so you haven't been doing this very long. You said 18 months. So have you had anyone, an older generation, an older relative, father, mother, who you've interviewed who has since passed away? Have you gotten to that part of the cycle yet?
Yeah, two. I've had two. Yeah, I had both were going through treatment at the time. They were going through chemotherapy. One was, I was just actually emailing the son today. So this was, the son was one. He had three siblings, so 3 sisters and the son. He was the eldest, and he wanted to do it with his dad, and then we also did it with his mum. They had separated quite acrimoniously 15 years earlier. His dad was going through treatment and hadn't been doing that well. It was, really quite a challenge. He was Israeli, and so he's quite a, not an open person. And I've had quite a few of those, and actually they're just as, fascinating, and I can tell they enjoy it. and they can be opened up, and they do value the experience, and it's been positive. So yeah, with him we did 6 sessions around his 3 sessions of 6 hours, which is the standard now pretty much, around treatment. And it was all very, and I did it separately with the mum. So I basically interviewed 4 children to talk about their dad separately. So that's 4 separate interviews of 1 hour each. Then I went to dad and captured his life story. And I did the same thing completely separately regarding mum. So it was 4 kids talking about mum, and then speaking with mum. And then we didn't really get in the room with the mum and dad at all. It was all kept separately. So it's that was all made possible. For them, the reason why I mentioned an Israeli is because he grew up in a kibbutz, which I didn't have a huge amount of knowledge, and I don't know if your listeners do. Kibbutz is the kind of traditional Israeli settlement where it's a very communal atmosphere, very non-capitalist, very sort of socialist. So there is no real sort of money. Everyone has a role in the community. So it might be he was in the fields and he was not cutting wheat. What was he doing? He was in the fields and he loved it and he had these amazing stories about it. But someone might be milking the cows or looking after the cattle, which is what the wife did when she moved in with him into the kibbutz. Someone would be washing laundry. Just imagine a society that runs basically on everyone fulfilling a certain role. Someone would be teachers for the children, etc. And then during the period of the 70s when they met, it was a kind of liberating moment, and people were coming in, much like people might travel when they're 18 in England anyway, between school and university, that people often go traveling if they have the means. And that might be 6 months just, jumping on a train and going to hostels around Europe or North America. Back in that day, it seemed like a thing to do was to go to Israel and to spend some time in a kibbutz. And that's how the parents had met. So after really interesting period of time when he was also traveling to the US and Australia and trying to find a better life in a way, and he was interested by American culture. He loved basketball. They ended up settling in England, where she was from, which was quite difficult for him because the culture is very different. Yeah, so they had kids there. They had 1 child, and then they moved back together to Israel and lived there for 6 to 8 years, I think. And that was very difficult for her because she had the culture shock of growing up, and it was very oppressive for women. And there's some tough stories about her around the birth of the 2nd and 3rd child. The boy was taken away from her. Things happened which she wasn't happy about, and when she had the 2nd one, she stood up for herself more. And she was a young English woman in a different society, so that was very interesting. And then the divorce happened, and it was a difficult time. And he got to tell that whole story, right? And he got to share all of that about that part of the life, which the kids basically, when they moved back to England, they spoke Hebrew, or they came to England and they were sort of told not to. They were told not to sort of share where they were from because it was a difficult place to be from. And so that part of their culture or their being or their family, they knew about, obviously, and they'd been back a little bit. But it was a bit of this hidden history. And so a lot of it for them was about reconnecting them with their heritage, where they're from, what it means for him to be Israeli, and therefore what it might mean for them. And so the children have talked about how healing it was for them. And although he didn't maybe express it, I know he did say it was a good experience to be able to share that. And then, sadly, it was probably 2 or 3 months now, he passed away. And actually, this morning I spoke to the son, and he said that they actually shared the interviews. So they had the wake in Israel, and for people who couldn't make it in England, they sent around. They did a video montage, but they used our discussion. For 30 minute sort of segment of his life history, which was me asking questions. But it really was quite it's quite affecting for me to think that not really for my ego, but just the fact that that what we had managed to do was important enough to be shared with the people that he loved most. And the son said, people commented on how nice it was to hear his voice, which is just where this all came from. That's exactly how I feel. Yeah. So that's that one. And then the second one has more recent. I was a friend of mine who I used to play rugby with. His mum was going through chemo. She was a wonderful, amazing storyteller. She had the best answer to my question around what was your earliest childhood memory. She said, my question was my other favorite question, which was stand at the front door of the home that you most remember when you were young and walk me through the house and tell me what it looks like, tell me what it smells like, tell me what sounds you can hear, and tell me if there's any food happening, any taste, so use your 5 senses. And she said, standing at the front door, there was always roses around our front doorway. And my mum always used to keep them in fantastic condition. And actually, I think that's my earliest memory of smelling those roses and standing at my front door. And yeah, she was amazing. She is an amazing woman. She got her reluctant husband to take part as well. So with my friend and the two parents, we did that. It was an amazing part where I actually did a special thing where they told the story of their wedding story, so they interviewed. I always do interviews separately, because what you might get is if you put people together, you get interruption, you get crosstalk, but you also get people being that person they always are in the room. But when you get an individual in the room, you get their whole being. And this would have happened in this case, is that she would have been talking more and the husband would have been happily just sitting back and listening. But by interviewing them separately, what I got was her version of events of their wedding day and his version of events. And it's so interesting, the little details that they pick up on and share and the way they tell that story. And then what I did is I cut them together. So you have then the two voices telling that story, even though it was told separately, into a one flow. And it was a very funny story, because what happened is that, she was talking about how she felt sick in the morning, and he was talking about the vicars, that the reverends couldn't agree. There was one church, it was the one reverend's church, but the other reverend was their reverend, so they had to share it. So they had two reverends, and that's what he was talking about. And she was talking about her dress, and just the different things people pick up on. And then at one point, basically, they kneel down at the altar, and everyone starts laughing in the room. And she was quite kind of worried or a bit anxious. What's everyone laughing about? And he was like, I have no idea. So then afterwards, they go into the separate part of the chapel or the church, and they're still saying, what was that all about? And his brother says, lift up your left shoe. And on his left shoe, on the sole of the foot, he sees the words painted in white, HE. And then he says, pick up your right shoe. He picks up his right shoe, and he sees the letters LP. So when he kneeled down at the altar, everyone could see the words help. Yeah, it's a good one. And so it was just really lovely, and I think they were probably the sixth family. The wrap up was so nice, because that's another thing about this, is that all the individual stories that you get the moment to share as an adult, an adult child, a 30-year-old, a 40-year-old. You get the moment to sort of sit and think about your parent and talk about them with someone who's listening. That's a really lovely experience, and I've been told that directly. How, gosh, I really enjoyed listening to my chapter. I know it was me, and that's maybe a bit selfish and egotistical, but it was really nice to hear me talk about my mum, because I love her. She's awesome. And then obviously you get the life story of the parent, which is, like the best podcast you've ever heard, because it's someone you love. And people always say, I actually just really enjoyed listening because it was so soothing. And sometimes I forgot it was my dad or forgot it was my mum. And then so the wrap up session with this family of the mother who's now passed, it was so nice to just have their repartee of joking and going back and forth. And I just always sit in those sessions and just think, it's so nice that we managed to make this happen. It's kind of artificial, obviously, to be recording it, but there's no way to capture a family interacting in such a natural way, because they are just chatting about like the stories they heard, and I'm in the room, but not saying very much. But he has that now on record. He can hear them laughing at each other. And in this case, the dad, who was one of three brothers, the prankster brother and the other prankster brother, I think, used to get up to a lot of mischief. And he calls out his dad, and he says, "Dad, you told the story of when you used to throw tires down the hill to try and hit the cars that were coming past." Basically, and one time a tire went down the hill, and it sort of bounced over something and then crashed into someone's window. And he said, "Whoa. Dad, when you told that story on the tape, you said that you didn't play any part in that. And I know that's not true. You always try to get out of things." And so they had a laugh about that, and you could tell how his dad was, laughing and joking as well. So that was lovely. And because this mother was just so in tune with her illness and just the love of her family, what we did is we recorded a message for each of the grandchildren, which was the first time I cried, which I afterwards thought, is that unprofessional? And she was sort of cheering me up, but it was unbelievable. Just thinking about, what she said for each of the seven grandchildren. She had a message each. So nice. I don't know. I actually only gave that to her on the side privately. So I actually don't know if that was shared in advance of her passing, or if maybe that's been left in part of her will, which, again, it just makes me quite emotional, really. So I messaged him, he's a friend, and I messaged him, I think, just to share, here's the latest. Is there anyone who would value it? And he said that his mum had passed away. And I just thought,
Well, I just
sad.
have a couple more questions as we start to wind down today. So next to last question, the penultimate question here. How is your son like your father?
Oh, that's a good one. He's 5 now. There's probably some stubbornness in there. So dad was quite, yeah, dad was quite, yeah, he was quite not fixed in his opinions. He mellowed out, and I think he thought more broadly when he got older. But yeah, I guess he had a certain view on how things should be done, which maybe all 5-year-olds have. That was definitely something. Yeah, my son's very tactile. My dad's tactile. It's funny. I think more about what I pass on. Maybe it's my sort of egotistical view, but I think about more what I received from my mum, my dad, or whatever my surroundings, my sisters.
You're stealing. You're stealing my thunder. That was my last. No, that was my last question. You're stealing my thunder here.
Go on then. What was it? What was it?
Go ahead.
What are you passing down?
So, what part of yourself do you think you are carrying on or passing down to your son from your father?
Right. Yeah. Sorry, I stole your thunder. Yeah, I think dad had a sense of what was important, and yeah, he was tactile for a man, I think, which is something that I really relish. I remember I used to love lying on top of him watching sport on the TV. It was the Green Bay Packers in the day, and then it was like English Test cricket when I got older. And he used to call it draping. He used to say, you want to come for a drape? And even to like quite an old age, like maybe my late teens, I would still just like lie at least with my head on him, maybe not fully on top of him, because I was much bigger than him by that point.
That would have been weird and awkward.
Yeah, weird and awkward. Like, dad, you're squashing me. But yeah, like tactile, hold his hand, or not be afraid to give him a hug. And that's something my son's very, I give that to my son. I think I'm very tactile with him. Yeah, and I think joking and playful, like silly jokes, this is silly stuff which lightens things up. I think my dad used to make pancakes on a Saturday, and he always used to do them in the shape of cartoon characters or whatever we asked him, basically. Bugs Bunny or Goofy, and so I now do that for the kids, and it's super fun. I do their name. I spell their name out in pancakes. So those are little things which I don't know if they know that actually, the pancakes. Those are the kind of things which I think are just really special, and it's important for us to spend time to enjoy, think what they are, think what you want to carry on, think what you want to pass on. So yeah, hopefully they'll understand that one day.
Yeah, one day they'll look back and those will be some of their best memories, I'm sure. So Neil, that's the end of this episode today. I've really enjoyed your stories, and I appreciate you being here. I know it took us a little bit of time to finally connect, but it was all worth it in the end. So thanks for being here today.
Oh, absolutely. No, thank you so much for being flexible. And yeah, it's really nice to talk. And thank you for giving me the space and many others, because it's a treat to be listened to like that. So thank you.
Thanks. So I'll include links to your Me and My Old Man so that people can contact you and find out whatever information they would want to know, and find out how to do that for their own family legacy, to gather those stories before it becomes too late. So one more time, Neil, I appreciate you being here. Say hi to your son. Tell him I apologize for him not getting tucked in by dad tonight. You can tuck him in twice tomorrow and make up for it.
Yeah, double it up. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks.
You're welcome. All right, that's it for this week's episode of Stories from Real Life. Until next time, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.